All right, there we go. So, welcome to our May the Fourth be with you, Mythic Mind Star Wars chat. I'm Andrew Snyder. I mean, anyone who's watching this right now probably is familiar with who I am. But just to kind of frame a little bit of what's going on here, our Mythic Mind community, which is really a association, kind of a network of Christians who are somehow involved in the humanities and understood very broadly. And we've mostly been taking a literary focus. The formation of this fellowship was really inspired by the Inklings and my appreciation for Tolkien and that sort of thing. Um, so we've done a lot of Tolkien and kind of Inkling adjacent sort of material. We just finished up a series on the Poetic Edda, and we've done some Beowulf and this sort of very literary kind of focus. But I thought it'd be fun to expand our scope a little bit and start engaging in some other media. And it's hard to get something less mainstream or more mainstream rather. I mean, than Star Wars. And so I thought this would be a good occasion to kick off our study of our analysis, our discussions of Star Wars with a live stream on May 4th. So this is just the general kind of conversation here. I mean, obviously, anybody participating in this conversation is somebody who appreciates Star Wars. Although what that means, well, may have a broader or more narrow scope for each of us. And so definitely we'll have some different perspectives, different lenses to bring to the table here. Um, yes, Jordan says he feels attacked. We'll see what that means probably just momentarily. But I think, I don't really have a super clear agenda for this conversation. I think that the best way to go about this is just for each of us to just very briefly introduce yourself, but then really focus in on, what is your experience of Star Wars? What is your history of Star Wars? Are you somebody who only affirms the original series? Or, are you somebody who's, watched everything and read all the books and played all the games, or are you somewhere in between? And so, for me, I can't remember not being familiar with Star Wars. I think that's, you know, probably pretty common, especially, for people who, well, were born after the original series came out. And so, I don't know when I first saw the movies. I very much I can specifically recall the VHS box set that we had of the original series, and I do remember seeing the original series with a re-release. I think it was probably leading up to the prequel series, the episode one. And so I remember that re-release. I watched the prequels as they came out in the theaters. And at the time, like I enjoyed them well enough, but I very much took on the sort of general groupthink that they were not particularly good films. Um, but over time, I've been inclined, and Jordan's going to argue with me on this, but I've been inclined to sort of reassess that a little bit. And my most recent rewatch, I actually enjoyed them. Um, I don't think they hold up to the originals, but I think that there's something of value there. Now, I can't be quite so diplomatic when it comes to the sequel series, but maybe we'll get there in in a little bit. And so, I'm very familiar with the movies. What really launched my recent reinvestment in Star Wars is, we talked about having a conversation on Knights of the Old Republic, which is I think one of the best things to come out of the Star Wars universe since the original series. And so in my revisiting of those games for that chat, it just sort of re-sparked my general interest. And so that's what launched this just broad rewatch and engagement. And so that's kind of where I am. I'm a big fan, generally speaking, even if maybe it's lost its way a little bit in recent years. But I'd love to just hear from some of you again. Just briefly introduce yourself and tell me something about your history with Star Wars. Um, I'll go clockwise as I have you on my screen here. Jordan, why don't you kick us off?
Hey, everybody. I know some of you from the C.S. Lewis group, so I think Ian might be the only one that I have not seen before, and anybody else that's streaming us. So, hi there. Um, so, like Andrew, I don't remember a time without Star Wars. Um, we we grew up in a household where my dad did not save the sleeves of VHS tapes for I don't know what reason, and so we had these like black hard plastic VHS cases that I think you could just buy in bulk. And all our Star Wars tapes were in those. For the kids, VHS tapes were these big, bulky things that you put into something called a VCR that also worked really good as a space dock. We had one of those ones that like lifted up and you put the tape in the top and pushed it down. Anyway, so as Andrew kind of alluded, I am a firm believer in the fact that there are only three Star Wars movies. I classify the Star Wars movies in this way. There are the three Star Wars movies. There are the apocryphal Star Wars movies, which are the prequel trilogy, because George Lucas is involved. And then there's the pseudepigraphal Star Wars universe, which is episode 7, 8, 9, and then was it Solo and I forget the other one. And then I will say that of the fan fiction movies, Rogue One is probably the best of all of the fan fictions. Yeah, I saw that look. My kids are divided from me on this. They really love the prequel trilogy. I will say that in 1999, that was I think my freshman year of high school. I went to the theater, saw Star Wars Episode 1. I was really excited about it. I think I saw it in the theater like 5 times. I kid you not. And I think that year for Halloween, I even dressed up as Darth Maul. Like had remember the old cheapo lightsabers that like popped out when you swung them? I had a double-sided one of that I think only lit up. I don't think it made sound. And my mom did like the full face paint thing. That has been my Twitter picture sometimes. But anyway, so I did see those movies growing up. I've actually seen all of the Star Wars movies. And I think just over time, I just grew to not like them very much. I'm not gonna, begrudge anybody for liking something that I don't. That's fine. I do constantly, tell my kids how sad I am that I've not raised them right, but it is what it is. We actually watched A New Hope today for Star Wars Day. I said, which movie we're going to watch, and 2 of them said A New Hope. One of them said that they wanted to watch Revenge of the Sith, and I said that was actually not an option. So we settled with A New Hope, and it was a good time. So I think that'll do it for me.
So I do need to ask a follow-up. So what is it that you don't like about, say, the prequels? Is it the dialogue, the acting, the story? I mean, there's a number of things to choose from, to be fair.
Yes.
Fair enough.
I mean, so okay. I love the pod racing thing. I'm not gonna lie, I love pod racing. I forgot to say that I played the pod racing game on Nintendo 64 way back in the day. My brother actually got me the pod racer, and there's another game on the Switch cartridge that comes with it, and I played the heck out of that thing. I do like the pod racing. The lightsaber duels are really top notch in the prequel trilogy because they had more to work with, but the dialogue just is awful. I think they totally wasted probably the second best Star Wars bad guy in Darth Maul, and that just kills me. And I know supposedly he comes back in the cartoons or whatever, but they just offed the guy, and that's, I don't know. I thought that was kind of a waste, and I don't know. I'm a big, as a Star Trek fan. I'm a agent of chaos this evening. I'm a big stickler for consistency, and there's some consistency issues between the original trilogy and the new or the and the prequels. The midichlorian thing was a no-go for me, like from the beginning. I don't know. So I hope that answers your question, and I hope that no one throws any rotten fruit at me.
It's one advantage of having these conversations digitally. Wait, so consistency? You're telling me that Lucas adding Hayden Christensen into the Return of the Jedi, that didn't do it for you?
Actually, so I have the DVD set. I just dumb luck found it at Goodwill. That has the laser disc transfer of the theatrical cut, and so I do not have to see Hayden Christensen in Return of the Jedi. It's great, and I get to hear Yub Nub. Who doesn't love Yub Nub? Oh, apparently Ian.
Yeah, so we'll get to that gripe in a few turns here. Yeah, it the updates that he made to the original trilogy, it's just none of them were necessary. In fact, very unnecessary. All right, fair enough. Well, I'm sure we'll turn back around to some of these ideas here. Hannah, your turn. Tell us a little about your experience with Star Wars.
Okay, so like probably everyone here, I grew up watching Star Wars. Now, sadly, I was not born when it originally came out in theaters, but I grew up. I think my first memory of like watching a movie was watching A New Hope with like my dad and my little brothers. And my dad kept pausing the movie to make sure we weren't too scared. And he like told us what was going to happen. Like he told us about like he's like this character is gonna die. Or like don't worry, like this is what's gonna happen. But I remember loving it, and since then, yeah, it's definitely been a big part of my life. um, just growing up, even, um, just yeah, it's definitely been something that has really brought me a lot of joy, and I do not hold to just the original three. However, I do acknowledge there's a lot of cringy things to the prequels, but I grew up watching Star Wars: The Clone Wars as a kid, so the animated show, and that really redeemed that time period for me. I think if there had just been the prequel movies, it would have been harder to get behind that time period in Star Wars history. But the show does a lot to redeem the failings of the prequel trilogy. And so that was definitely part of my experience. Then I grew up with then like Star Wars Rebels coming out, and then with Disney with the movies, which I all went to see all of them, and then The Mandalorian, obviously, and some of the more recent adventures Disney has made into Star Wars. I would say there's been some good things, some bad things. I do actually really like Rogue One, but I haven't been a fan really of anything else Disney has done movie wise. I think some of the animated stuff is generally pretty good. But it's definitely been a big part of my life. As a kid, I have this ultimate Star Wars dictionary, and I would just flip through it, so I could tell you like really obscure character names and things still from that. But it's definitely been very enjoyable. I sympathize with only acknowledging the original three. I think I'm biased because I grew up with other stuff as well. I grew up with the apocryphal works.
Yeah, I'd say it is something. It speaks something about the power of Star Wars that there is this whole lore built up around it, right? You have a dictionary of lore trivia type stuff, and I say that because it's a bit unusual for something that's strictly cinematic. I mean, obviously it has books, but it's cinematic in its nature. Books spun out of that. I mean, and so it's one thing to have someone like Tolkien, not and don't this is not at all undercutting Tolkien. Tolkien is far superior to anything Star Wars has to put out there. Make that clear. But at the same time, like it's, I think it's far easier to have that kind of world in literature, that kind of gripping, deep world. It's something kind of unique about Star Wars that we get that in cinema or out of cinema, and so I think it just speaks to something about the power that lies underneath it. All right, we'll come back to some of that. Justin, tell us about your experience with Star Wars.
Okay, well, I've also loved Star Wars since I was a kid. I first saw it on TV, actually, cable television or whatever. So with commercials back in the day. And I don't know why I hadn't seen it before. I just didn't really know anyone who had seen it. Of course, I'd heard of it and everything. And I remember watching it just by myself. It might have just been all in one day. I can't remember. Maybe it was over the course of a couple days, but I just remember just sitting there and being like, this is incredible. This is like the best movies I've ever seen. And then I remember I went to like basketball practice or something and told one of the guys on my team, I thought it was kind of this nerdy thing a little bit. And he was like, oh yeah, Star Wars, it's incredible. So I've been a fan ever since then. I'll say that when the Disney bought it, I was so excited for the first one they were make was that uh what was the name of that one? Um I can't remember right now. The Force Awakens, yeah. And I was so excited. I had my dog was named after a Star Wars character. Like I was so excited. And I went to the theater and I watched it. And I don't know how long it took me, but it was not very long, like 15 minutes maybe. And then half an hour and then an hour. And I was just I was just like, this is I can't believe I was I couldn't believe what they did. And I just swore to myself I wouldn't see another single movie. It was heretical to me. Um, Years later, this is probably maybe 2 years back now. I was talking with a Christian elder brother, sort of friend slash mentor, and he was like, and the topic of Star Wars came up, and he was like, yeah, I hear what you're saying, but you should check out The Mandalorian. Like it's actually good. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah, it flies a little bit more under the radar because it's a show, and they don't have to kind of do some of the other stuff that gets in there for these bigger releases. And it was like, it's actually good. Um, uh, you know, um, uh, Oh man, I'm blanking. Hovercraft racing through the desert and whatnot. So I watched Mandalorian, and that brought me kind of back into the fold with some of the new stuff. I have very strong opinions about what is canon. My canon is the original three. The prequels, obviously not as good, but I count them. Um, the Mandalorian seasons one and two, but not beyond that. And if none of you have seen this, The Mandalorian seasons one and two is good. And the reveal at the end of season two is just so phenomenal that I mean I gotta give them credit for that. And then Knights of the Old Republic, the first game, is probably the best Star Wars story. Certainly, since the original three, I'd even like entertain the argument that it's maybe a better story than it's so good. Yeah, it's amazing. So that's my canon. Yeah.
Good, yeah, and I would definitely echo a lot of that. I already mentioned Knights of the Old Republic, and I totally agree that it's debatably on par with the original series, although I feel very uncomfortable saying that. Uh, but it's definitely, it's the best thing since then, at least. And yeah, The Mandalorian is great. It's probably the best that's come out of the Disney era. I've only seen the first two seasons so far. I have a bad habit of watching a show, even a show that I enjoy, and then I just stop. I don't know, I just get distracted by other things. So I haven't willfully not watched the third season. Just hasn't happened so far. I'll get there at some point. Um, yeah, so far, not a lot of love for Disney. Um, all right, Ian, let's hear what you have to say, and then we'll circle back around to some of these ideas.
So when I was 10 years old, actually 9 in 1995 or 96, my godmother took me on a bike ride and told me the story of A New Hope. And I'd never heard of this before. I thought that it sounded really cool. And at this time, I was very much part of the culture of my family was we read the book before we saw the movie. So I actually read the novelizations of the original trilogy before I watched the movies themselves. And I blame this for the fact that for me, Star Wars is actually books. It's not movies. Um, I love the movies. I share a lot of the criticisms of the prequels. I think they're extremely badly written. I think they're poorly acted and directed. I think they have very interesting concepts that makes sense if you think of the characters as game pieces rather than people. It's a very neat way of moving them around the board, but the motivations for Anakin slaughtering not one, but two groups of children in cold blood are not not strong enough to justify what happens in the movies. Um, but I think that what authors like Timothy Zahn and Aaron Alston and Michael Stackpole and Kathy Tyers and James Luceno were able to take um, the concepts and the characters and the world that George Lucas created, I think really is where the pinnacle of Star Wars reached for me. I think that the ability to dig into concepts of the Force and ethics and what it's like to be an X-wing pilot rather than just your Jedi or your top of the rung military leadership, but what it's like to be a normal person and face these hard moral choices in a desperate fight for freedom. That's what Star Wars really is for me.
Yeah, and like Jordan mentioned in the chat here, I really don't have any experience with the books, and so that's it's very interesting to hear. And I would definitely like to pick up some of them, especially the ones that have been most highly recommended pretty often to me. So, Ian, I'm interested in this since you have a very literary focus on Star Wars. What is it to you that makes Star Wars great? Like, what is personally appealing to you about this world?
Star Wars to me, I think, is the blend of so many different things in George Lucas's mind, and so many authors and creatives came in behind him and blended their own interests. So Lucas, of course, took the almost Manichaean good versus evil of World War II and blended in some Zen Buddhism and also some Methodist theology. And he also took in his fascination with creatures and aliens and the weird and bizarre and music videos. There's just such a blend of political, philosophical, entertainment, and historical pieces into a story which has archetypal characters that you can both understand and pour yourself into. So Luke Skywalker is both an archetype that you can see yourself in as, you're someone from nowhere who gets plunged into something bigger than they are, but you can also see how he grows through trauma, the trauma of losing his hand and finding out that Darth Vader is his father, and really question whether he can join the light or the dark side in Return of the Jedi. I think that the best Star Wars stories, like Knights of the Old Republic, like the Thrawn trilogy, take these archetypical characters and also give them their own journeys that you can learn from. There's always going to be an element of didacticism in a good Star Wars story, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think it's really insightful. And I like that you mentioned that Lucas in laying the groundwork that others have picked up and kind of moved in some different directions with. That he has a lot of different influences that are coming into putting this world together, this galaxy together. I suppose I should say, world understood in a broad sense. And I've heard a number of people, a number of Christians, honestly, express some concern that, this is all Eastern philosophy, that, there's something inherently antithetical to the Christian worldview, to Christian thought in Star Wars. And I think that you can go that way if you follow certain elements of what's gone into creating Star Wars. But I think also you can get a very Christian reading of Star Wars as well if you follow those roots. Personally for me, I think that what provides the most comprehensive take on where does Star Wars come from. I think that you need to go to Campbell, Joseph Campbell, who Lucas recognizes what played an important role in shaping his thought. The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which I haven't read yet, but it's coming tomorrow, so I'll talk about that more another time. Um, but, and he was very influenced by Carl Jung, who focuses on these archetypes and these things that we know without knowing them. This is where we really get this idea of, you need to go rescue your father from the underworld. Like these ideas are very archetypal, very Jungian, and very much at display in specifically the original series. And I find that and that even that Jungian approach ultimately I think is very Platonic, which Plato is very adaptable to Christianity. At least that's what the early church certainly thought. And so when you follow that path, directing Star Wars ultimately to Plato, as you know, that's what I find personally the most compelling. I find that actually to be very amicable to a Christian worldview. And in fact, even this sort of Manichaean light and dark, I just recently discovered doesn't really come up in the original series. In fact, in the original movies, they don't really talk about the light side of the Force. You have the Force and you have the dark side. It's not necessarily light and dark. It's like the reality and then the shadow. That's very different than where things developed later on in other media. And so, you know, when you really get down to the roots of it, I think that that's very compelling as a Christian to understand things that way. You have basically the real and the illusionary, the substance, the shadow. And so there's so much that goes into creating Star Wars that there's a lot of different directions that we can go with this. Some of which I think are going to be more profitable than others. But that's to me, that's what Star Wars is. Yeah, Ian says very Augustinian, which is really what I mean when I talk about Christian Platonism. I'm talking about Augustinianism, and I definitely agree. And so, you know, that's why as you know, as a Christian, someone interested in philosophy and theology, I find Star Wars to be very compelling at the root level. Now, I think that where things kind of went wrong is that when we get to the prequels, you know, still led by Lucas, there's still something of that there, but we're moving away from a sort of existential archetypal story to now we're getting more into the broad scale, the political, I would say almost, which at that point we're sort of getting a little bit away from the individual human experience, which I think is what made the original series so great. And so there's still something of value there, you know, setting aside, yeah, some of the bad dialogue, although even that I've kind of been convinced to forgive some of that. You know, the worst dialogue in the prequels definitely comes from Hayden Christensen, you know, his dialogue with Padme. It's the worst. At the same time, I've had people telling me that you know, this is actually part of the story in that, you know, he's this kid who's been raised by these celibate monks now thrown into this relationship. He doesn't really know how to talk to women. You know, he has all these emotions he doesn't know how to deal with. Maybe he is sort of, maybe he should be this awkward figure who doesn't really know how to have conversations. I don't know. But that aside, I think that we just start to go astray because we lose that deep existential component we have in the original. And then by the time we get to the Disney movies, I don't think there's any rooted intentionality at all. It's just we're going to talk about some stuff that happened, check off some boxes to, you know, to get out what marketing tells us people want, and now here's a mishmash of story put together by different directors that don't agree with each other as to what's happening. It's an absolute mess. And so I think that really is my explanation of the long defeat that we see in the progression of Star Wars. Um, all right, I monologued a little bit too long here. Jordan, to you, what is Star Wars? What's compelling to you about it, even if it's just the original series?
I mean, I think that it's a combination of a lot of things. It's bound up in kind of my family's identity. I mean, my dad raised us to like sci-fi and fantasy. And so that, you know, Star Wars was an obvious choice for that. But I think as far as the story itself goes, I really like the development of some of the characters in particular. I think Han's arc is amazing. You know, going from this guy who just, you know, is totally out for himself to the end of, you know, New Hope when he's, you know, coming back, and Luke knew he was going to come back the whole time. The salvation arc for Vader is really wonderful. It's almost like he's ascending as Luke descends, and then I don't know, they almost like pull each other up at the end. And I think that being a dad has affected the way I see that. I don't know, being a dad just totally it messes you up in all the best ways possible. But I think that mostly for me, it is the way the characters develop over the story. They're not just one or two dimensional figures that are in this big budget at the time, you know, light show with all these amazing effects for, you know, 1977 through 1983. I mean, you just didn't see stuff like that back then. I mean, it even affected the way Star Trek, made its way onto the big screen. And there's some interplay between the two series even. But I think it's just the way that the characters are told. I really, you mentioned the interplay between the dark and the light. That isn't really I think you're right, and the light side is not really mentioned in the original trilogy. But that almost feels like John to me a little bit, in that that you've got this darkness that just seems to be extending over everything, but it cannot comprehend the light. And I think that the character development in that story really brings all that out so well.
Yeah, I think that's well said. Which at the same time, one of the, the worst things about the Disney movies is how they just utterly betray everything you just talked about. How, when they do bring in the original characters, they just assassinate them. I mean, you have this great arc of Han, and then, finally getting together with Leia. You've got the rogue kind of finally made an honest man, and now he's just like this deadbeat dad who has no relationship with his wife, and he just gets killed in, I mean, a pretty pitiful way. Like, I get that Harrison Ford, he originally wanted to die a martyr in the original series, and so he finally got his wish. But I just feel like if they were going to go that route, everything about him should have been more compelling by that point. And then, I mean, Luke is just this loser exiled drinking weird milk from this weird space cow. They took these characters, just totally eradicated them. But yeah, I mean, go to the original series, and I think you do see some phenomenal progressions. And I mean, I don't know the last time before just recently that I watched through the original movies. I do it every once in a while, but this may have been my first time since becoming a father. My oldest are 3.5 now, and it is a different experience dealing with that relationship between Luke and Vader, and that reconciliation at the end. I mean, it's knowing exactly what's going to happen. Like, it's hard to not experience that on a deep level, seeing it again. And so, yeah, there's just so much that's so compelling about that. That again, just it's unfortunately lost in the later editions. Um, Hannah, to you, so you've seen the movies, you've read some of the books. I mean, to you, what is Star Wars, and what makes it compelling?
Oh, that's like a hard question. I was trying to think of it while Jordan was responding. I think I would definitely second a lot of what he says. I would say it's really compelling. It really captured my imagination from an early age. And it captured my imagination in a way that I would say had a generally a net positive effect. Obviously, just the worlds and just the freedom that an entire galaxy offered. And while keeping it very, I would say, for the most part, Star Wars is very much like kid friendly, and not in a bad way, in a very good way. It's not a very dark, like gritty science fiction universe. Yeah, there are things that are unrealistic about it. I mean, that's why people can really tear Star Wars apart if they want to. But I think there's something beautiful about that, and something that really appeals to the mind of a child and the imagination of a child. And I think that's why it's so compelling and multi-generational, that families can continue to watch it, and the kids can see it at an early age, and it just captures them, and then they want to show that to their kids. And I think that's what is really special about Star Wars. And I would say, obviously, there are some concerning things, especially with later things, not just the originals, but later things in terms of some of the philosophical origins of some of the ideas there. But I would say, in general, the major things that I got away from it as a kid was just good versus evil, and just having heroes, Star Wars characters that I looked up to for various reasons. I mean, for example, like one of my favorite characters is Obi-Wan, and like looking up to him, his wisdom and courage as a character. And I think that's something that's just very valuable with Star Wars and with any media. I think it's just so valuable to provide that source of imagination and joy that's also, filling the imagination with things that are going to be true, good, and beautiful. And so I think that's just what Star Wars is for me. And I also kind of judge the Star Wars content I consume based off of that. Is that what I'm getting away from this? Is this something that's, filling my imagination in a positive way? If it's not, then I won't watch it, or I'll stop watching it, or reading it. But I found that a lot of Star Wars stuff, sometimes imperfectly, still accomplishes that goal.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think it's a good test of discernment for really any media we engage with. Is it fueling our imagination in a positive direction or in a negative direction? And, at this point in our cultural milieu, sorry to use French there, I apologize. In our setting here, we I can really cheer on anything that has clear divisions between good and evil. Like that's kind of my barrier. Like if we have that, I can be happy with it. I can cheer it on. And we definitely see that in Star Wars, but things get really blurry with the Disney movies, where they really are engaging in just deconstruction, which is, I guess, the hot word of the day. And so, but aside from that, and I think that even in there, you still have something of the division of good and evil, which can be redemptive. Um, and again, that intergenerational component to it, I think that also speaks something to its power that, it can be enjoyed by a child who just thinks cool stuff is happening, or it can be enjoyed by somebody who's able to apply a bit more of mental faculties to it. You know, Sometimes when I talk about that, about approaching Star Wars from a philosophical angle, people will push back and say, look, obviously this is not Shakespeare, it's not Plato, it's entertainment. But at the same time, like there are some significant ideas that are under the surface. And the reality is, like everything is significant if you choose to recognize it as such. And you especially wouldn't get something so phenomenally successful like the Star Wars franchise unless there was something there that actually spoke to the human experience. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so attractive. And so there's always something there in a compelling story. And I think that taking some time to think about what is it that attracts me to this thing, to this story, that can provide an important avenue of understanding yourself as well as like, what it means to be human. Um, in fact, I used to, I've done a number of things. One benefit of majoring in philosophy is, until you get the job you want, you do a number of things along the way. And, for a time, I was responsible for doing some hiring for retail type stuff. And, I had all the entry level kind of positions for a time. And, I was responsible for putting together what those interviews looked like. And I found that consistently the most helpful question that would allow me to predict workplace success was, tell me what your favorite book or movie is and why. Now, that sounds like a kind of hokey interviewee type question, but it's actually really significant. If they can tell me, here's what I like, but also most importantly, why I like it, that shows me you understand something about yourself and the way that you're engaging with the world around you. It's intentional. You have that reflection. And so, if we can watch something like Star Wars, read something like Star Wars, play something like Star Wars, whatever that is, and apply our minds to it, I actually think that there is a good bit we can get out of it, even if we're not necessarily engaging with the greats of classical philosophy. And so there's mind, there's entertainment, there's a lot of value to be had in that. I think those are that's the formula for enchantment. You have mind and you have the entertainment. You have that which muses you. Um, Justin, to you, what is Star Wars and what makes it compelling to you?
Well, for me, I think Star Wars at its core is medieval level stories of honorable and courageous knights going on adventures and fighting monsters or wickedness, fighting dragons in a more modern setting or a futuristic setting. I mean, but I see the Jedi Knights in the same way that I would look up to, to Beowulf or to any, to any older knight in armor, to find that sort of inspiration, to find heroes to emulate, goodness. The clear lines between good and evil. I also really enjoy the world building um, side of it. I don't know, in the same for some of the same reasons that I love the Lord of the Rings and the Narnia books. I don't know. I'm not really concerned with the any sort of realism in the technology side of it, or whether we can go to other planets. But it's just another avenue to be able to use your imagination to think of different worlds, and to practice that, because I believe that God enjoys when we do that. I think that um, Andrew, in one of the previous lessons, you might have talked about how when we read books, we participate in that world building process, or even if we play an RPG, um, we participate in that in a way that maybe we don't when we watch movies as much, but this universe of Star Wars is something that, we can still kind of bring away from the movie experience and use our imaginations for. And so I enjoy that part of it. I like also the aesthetics of it. These are a couple more secondary things for me, but like I love some of the architecture, some of the, the clothes, or the the scenery, the different kind of landscapes of different planets, or the buildings or the ships. And I think some of that's done so well that it's so cool. And one other thing that I really enjoy is that I do feel that on the realistic side of things, that the whole kind of Jedi ethos and process does get a little bit into, say, the desert fatherish area, where I, I'm not so sure that all of it is just fantasy, and I like thinking about some of our forefathers and ancestors that might have lived in ways kind of maybe closer to some of the scenes that we might see in some of those movies. Or, for example, maybe a cave on Tatooine. And I'm not sure that some of those abilities aren't possible. And that some of our Christian forebears may have had some of those. Not that that is or should be our goal, but I find it interesting to think about. So yeah, I think like everyone, I have a lot of different aspects that make it up for me, and I agree with a lot of the points that everyone has made. But I guess to just kind of distill it down to the simplest form, for me, it's stories about knights having to try to fight for what is right.
Yeah, I mean, I at some time a while back, I posted an image of Qui-Gon fighting Darth Maul and titled it, Saint Anthony fights with the devil. And, I don't know, I find that humorous. Anyways, on more substantially responding to what you said, that on the secondary level of aesthetics, I definitely think there's something just so iconic about the feel of Star Wars. I mean, the whooshing and of a lightsaber, like there's just something, I don't know, special about that, in a way that I can't go off on some philosophical analysis other than it's cool and it's enchanting. There's something about the feel that is certainly enrapturing. And I appreciated where you set Star Wars related to I mean, Lord of the Rings, related to Beowulf, even like sort of fantasy, medievalism, that sort of thing. I've gotten into these debates before about what is the genre of Star Wars, and on the surface level, it definitely looks like sci-fi, but at the heart of it, it's fantasy. It just happens to be set in space and on different planets. But like you mentioned, they don't really get into to like how does things work, or why is it that you can breathe on any planet? Like that, they're different worlds. They're not really different planets. It's like you're going into different portals in the wood between the worlds. I think that's a better way of framing it. It is fantasy, and all that entails regarding just not only the setting, but at the heart of it, what it is. And so I think there is that natural overlap there. Cool. Um, well, Ian, I already asked you what Star Wars is to you. So maybe we can go a little bit more negative here. And where, like, you're obviously critical of the movies, probably even more so than I am, like, of the ones that come after the originals. Where do you think the movies kind of go wrong compared to your version of Star Wars with, the literature or wherever else?
I think what worked with the original trilogy is that Lucas was able to, because he was collaborating more on an equal level with other writers and directors, he was able to create characters that had more universal appeal. And so he was able to do things with the moral actions that those characters did that people were able to say, I understand this is good and evil. In the prequels, I don't think he was able to transcend the archetypical nature of the characters he was playing with. The orphan traumatized boy who grows up wanting to become powerful and is corrupted by the evil, you know, uh, sorry, what was the impeached president? Richard Nixon? Yeah, the Nixon figure. Um, like all the characters in the prequels are, as I said, I really think they work more if you think of them as game pieces being moved around a board to make a symbolic picture of evil overcoming good. Um, and I think the problem with that is because you don't know exactly how to feel about characters like Anakin, and for me personally, Obi-Wan, I think there's a lot of potential in Obi-Wan, but he's so flawed. I actually think that Anakin is right to say that he's overly judgmental. He doesn't he doesn't listen to Anakin. He's not a good mentor. He was thrust into that role too soon. And so I don't say that he's a bad person or a bad character, but he's not a good teacher in that way, especially for Anakin. But because there's all this ambiguity and because their dialogue is not well crafted, so that it's kind of like a bunch of philosophical propositions plopped down into conversation, and you don't really know, should I agree with this person because I like them or because they do good things or not? There's a lot of philosophical content in those movies, a lot of good and evil actions and good and evil thoughts. They're just kind of put there, and Lucas doesn't make it clear what actually is true. So he talks about things like balance of the force. And there is an Augustinian way to think about balance of the force, that the force is balance and the dark side is imbalance. But some other people take it to mean that the force is the light side and the dark side, and they have to be in balance with each other. And that, of course, would be the more Zen idea. Lucas doesn't clarify that. He doesn't have a character um, really dive into that who we can trust. Like we can trust Qui-Gon, but he doesn't get into what balance of the Force means. Similarly, Anakin, he talks about things like, I think there should be this dictatorship, and Padme's like, no, there shouldn't be. But then Padme falls in love with Anakin right after he slaughters a bunch of children, and so you don't get a sense that either Padme or Anakin have a moral perspective, a moral grounding that you can latch onto, like you can ground yourself in Leia's perspective or Luke's perspective, um, and you can't ground yourself in Han's perspective because he is that morally unstable guy who shoots a guy under the table. Now, I think that he is justified in shooting that guy under the table, but it is a ruthless action. He doesn't have that same moral core that Luke and Leia do. We don't have that moral core in Padme or Anakin or even Obi-Wan that we can say their perspective authorizes us to think this way about the Force and about balance and about what the right path is. And I think that failure in creating those more grounded characters that we can have a handle on is where the prequels go off the rail. And then, of course, the Disney movies are just they're too mimic. They copy too much, so they don't really have anything to say.
Now, what would you say to the argument that this is like Lucas playing 4D chess here, where the artistry of what he does in the prequels is in not giving us clear answers, thereby leaving room for subcreation, leaving room for the viewer to figure out their own take on what's going on. I mean, could that not be a mark of artistry?
You could. I think going back to C.S. Lewis's An Experiment in Criticism, and you look at how Star Wars is read, I don't see enough people reading it in a careful way. For example, if you talk to people about things like the Jedi taking children away from their parents and not letting them have attachments, not letting them get married and develop as mature emotional people, a lot of the people I talk to, and I'm not just talking about casual fans, I'm talking about people who have spent a lot of time thinking about this, they don't understand that this is actually supposed to be contradicted by Return of the Jedi. Darth Vader is redeemed by the love of his son, by the attachment of his son. But Lucas was not clear enough in how he portrayed the Jedi and their ethics and their actions in the prequels. And I think that is a failing that is reflected in how there isn't a clear reading by the audience of the text.
And I think that Qui-Gon does lay some groundwork that could have been picked up in an interesting direction. In that he is the good guy. He's the lead good guy really of the first of episode one, um, but he isn't on the council because he doesn't embrace the full Jedi code, and so this really helps us to see that whatever the kind of right side of the force is, that doesn't it maybe it's something beyond simply what the Jedi have to offer. And I think that based off what you just said about the redemption of Anakin at the end of Return of the Jedi, that shows us that it is the attachment that he is redeemed. And so the Jedi they don't have the full say on what the right actions is, the right course of life. That there's room for criticizing them in a way that doesn't actually deconstruct good and evil, but actually puts the Jedi under judgment of what is truly good. I think that Qui-Gon, his character, provides that groundwork for doing that. I just agree with you that it's not really executed in a clear direction at all.
Could I apologize, I am taking a lot of time, but I wanted to, because we're talking about Qui-Gon, I have two books and I wanted to read really two short excerpts from Qui-Gon's perspective about this. The first one's Master and Apprentice by Claudia Gray, and Qui-Gon's fighting with an old apprentice of Count Dooku, because in the movies, Qui-Gon is an apprentice of Count Dooku. So this author, Claudia Gray, has him talking with another apprentice, and the apprentice says, do you even think about what balance of the Force would mean, Qui-Gon? It would mean darkness would be just as strong as the light, so it doesn't matter what we do, because in the end, hey, it's a tie. And then Qui-Gon responds by saying, it matters. It matters which side we choose. Even if there will never be more light than darkness, even if there's no more joy in the galaxy than there is pain, for every action we undertake, for every word we speak, for every life we touch, it matters. I don't turn towards the light because it means someday I will win some sort of cosmic gain. I turn toward it because it is the light. And I think that indicates that there's something self-evident in the light that is true, beautiful, and good, so that it's not about winning a game or balancing the scales or fulfilling a prophecy. It's about there's something in us, as Romans 1 says, that recognizes the good, and we turn towards it if we're enabled to. And then the second is from John Jackson Miller's The Living Force. And at the very end of the book, Qui-Gon says, attachments are not the problem, indifference is. Save a friend, Obi-Wan, and the friend may save you. And I really think that that's why I love the literature of Star Wars, because it's able to take a character like Qui-Gon and flesh out that philosophical understanding that gives us that ground to stand on.
Yeah, it's good. I appreciate you bringing that in. It does provide a bit more to his story and what it is that he represents. Um, Now, I will say one more thing as a side note, not quite as significant as what you were discussing, but you did mention the relationship between Obi-Wan and Anakin, and you said Anakin may have some justification there in criticizing Obi-Wan. I did catch this time around, and I'm sure I'm not I know I'm not the first one to catch this, but that Anakin, a few times will refer to Obi-Wan as being like his father. And then Obi-Wan, at that final fight at the end of Revenge of the Sith, Obi-Wan says we were brothers. And so they have a very different understanding of what their relationship is. And so, Obi-Wan really, because he was thrusted into it, he failed this master-apprentice relationship, really seeing them as equals. So it's the problem that parents have when they just want to be buddies with their kids, or like a teacher when they just want to be accepted as cool to their students, that you lose something of your significance there and thereby something of your efficacy. And so it's just another element of, I think, something significant that you can find in the prequels. If you're able to look past, some of the dialogue, some of the writing, that sort of stuff. And I'm somebody who wants to enjoy things. And so I can do that. Because I want to enjoy things. If there's something good there, I want to see it. And I think that's one of the lessons that you can see there. One example of the fact that, the prequels, they aren't empty of significance, even if maybe they could be dressed up a little bit better. um, cool. I mean, I could go around in circle again, but I mean, does anyone else have anything that you want to discuss? Anything else you want to bring up? Well, so Ian says Han was totally justified in shooting first or at the same time. Yeah, I mean, to be sure, obviously he was under threat there, by this scumbag. So I mean, fair enough. Um, yeah, and Han Solo, I mean, he he might be my favorite character, and so it's one of the things I'll never forgive Disney for what they did to him. Um, now, we've all kind of hated on the Disney sequels. Can anybody say anything positive about them? This is going to be your test for today.
The music is good. Sometimes I'll listen to some of the music. I'll say that's good. I think honestly, The Force Awakens, having seen it also as a kid, like I wasn't necessarily like on the hate train at first with The Force Awakens. I think I got on the hate train with the next one after that, The Last Jedi, is where things just completely went off the rails. But I would say, um, yeah, the music. I would say, I mean, there's some. I did not. um, there might be some. I'm having trouble thinking of it. To be fair, I haven't seen them in a while. I'd say there's the most good to be found in The Force Awakens. It's very basic plot line. It's basically just, I mean, you can see comparison of that movie with the plot of the original trilogy, and it's very much just a copy paste. But in that sense, it almost protects it from what happens later on.
Yeah, I can largely agree with that. I recently, as I said, I watched all of the movies, wanting to enjoy all of it. It became very difficult when you get to the sequels. With starting with The Force Awakens, I kind of like the character of Finn. I feel like there's potential that he could be working to something significant. I think it's kind of cool. You have the stormtrooper who converts to the good guys, and maybe he has some kind of force sensitivity. Like there's interesting stuff they could have done with him. He really has this knightly kind of role to Rey, and what drives me crazy is Rey, who obviously is the protagonist of that series, the heroine that we're supposed to appreciate, maybe even look up to. She just dismisses him. Like it's not even that she scorns his chivalrous kind of behavior toward her. She puts it off as if it's like silly and juvenile. And that right there is Disney telling me that they're really trying to dismiss anything like traditionalism, right? Anything like traditional relationships between men and women. And so they take what is, I would say, the most wholesome character, and they just sideline him to the point where, you go a movie or two later and he's almost entirely insignificant and forgettable. And so I feel like they laid some groundwork for some interesting things that they just cut the line on too early. I mean, and even, I can appreciate something about Kylo Ren in that he really doesn't have any motivation other than just rebelling against his parents. Like, and so he's just this petulant, complaining rebel for no reason who just totally consumed by his emotion. And so I think that he does a good job of demonstrating just the banality of evil, right? The fact that it's so pitiful that there's really nothing commendable to be had there. It's all just emotional rebelling against the good for no reason at all. And, makes me think of even Augustine, to go back to Augustinianism. In City of God, when Augustine is talking about um, why, why, why we have the original sin, why is there evil? And, he says basically with Adam and Eve, okay, well, you've got the satanic influence. Okay, let's back it up. How do we get the fall of Satan? And at that point, he says, basically, evil's irrational. And so we shouldn't expect to be able to come up with a rational answer. And it kind of sounds like a cop out, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense that evil is irrational because the good is the real and the real is rational. Uh, and so evil being a rebellion against the logos, a rebellion against reason, I think I think it's good to have a character that is just irrational and emotional and flighty and doesn't really have any clear goals beyond just destroying stuff and smashing up his own ship when he gets temper tantrums. Like, so there's something I can actually find appealing about that. But at the same time, and yeah, I think that Adam Driver, I think he did well the role that he was given. I think it was good casting. And so I can appreciate something about that. Um, and so that's probably the most positive things that I can say about the series. But beyond that, I mean, so much of it would just focus on deconstruction, and I'm definitely not on board with that.
I
All right.
don't know.
I mean, we could go ahead. Yeah, Ian.
I don't know how much I can say in favor of the Disney movies themselves, but as I've said, I'm a book guy. Star Wars is a book universe, and so I did just quote from 2 Star Wars Disney books. So I'm not like cutting off Disney just because I think their movies are crap. There are still authors who are doing their best to create stories that push us towards the light in Star Wars, I think.
I will also just real quickly say a good word for Rogue One. I really love Rogue One. I enjoyed it a lot. So I think it's definitely the best movie that Disney has done by a long way. And this could be controversial. I will say I think I like Rogue One better than the prequels. Like if I was gonna pick a Star Wars movie to watch, between the prequels and Rogue One, I'd probably pick Rogue One. It's controversial, I know, but it could also be that I was like growing up and I actually got to see Rogue One in theaters, which was very fun.
I think that's a pretty popular opinion that Rogue One is definitely a top tier. And I had that impression based off my vague awareness of what I've seen years ago. In my recent rewatch, I don't think I like it very much. That
What are your reasons? I'm curious.
so I appreciate that it has definitely a better put together narrative than the main Disney movies. It's more coherent, obviously more thought out. At the same time, I feel like most of the characters, at least this is entirely subjective, I felt like they were pretty forgettable. I can't name basically any of the characters, and I just saw the movie, and so I feel like it. I don't know. I don't really care about any of them, and so for that reason, it doesn't really stick with me. And so I can appreciate that. Like, maybe on paper it's good, and I appreciate the heroic deaths and all that stuff. It's very Northern Spirit kind of mentality, which I appreciate. At the same time, I don't know, it felt kind of cold and forgettable to me. But I recently posted that over on Twitter, and people assumed I was just engagement baiting because it's so crazy. But I don't know. That's kind of how I approached it. Whereas I also watched Solo, and I don't think that's a good movie. At the same time, I thought it was kind of fun. Like, I mean, it didn't need to be made, and yeah, I mean, you kind of have to approach it in isolation in that it's not Han Solo, but at the same time, just sort of a fun Star Wars heist movie. Like, I don't know, I thought that was fun. Not necessarily a good movie, but at least stood out to me a little bit more. But I know that's kind of heretical to say.
That's okay. I think there's a lot of room for diversity of opinions when it comes to these things. I need to finish. I'm like halfway through rewatching Rogue One, so I'll need to finish it and maybe see if my opinions have changed at all. But it definitely, I do think there's room for a variety of opinions, and different people might be able to appreciate and redeem different things about Disney Star Wars. because I think whereas I'd say obviously like the goal would be to have something that everyone can agree is good. I think people can kind of pick and choose certain things that they like about Disney Star Wars, and so there's a lot of diversity of opinion over what's the best or worst Disney thing.
That's very diplomatic. I want you to tell me I'm wrong. But no, that's totally fair. I mean, yeah, I mean, obviously
Yeah,
there's such a big range of what we appreciate that, or what can be appreciated that we can all approach that from different angles.
yeah. I would say I will defend Rogue One then. So, I will say it tells a story that actually like contributes and adds something to be told rather than some of the other things they do. Just it's like throwing things out there. It's a lot more original and unique than anything that else they did movie wise, especially the sequels were just very much yeah, it was just kind of recycled and worse off Star Wars. I would say Rogue One did some different things, and it was a good movie. And I would say I do think some of the characters are compelling. I would say it's difficult because they introduce a huge host of new characters, and they don't really rely on a bunch of old characters that everyone's familiar with. And also, they just have like one movie versus like a trilogy to really flesh out the characters. So I think they do a good job with the time they have. And specifically, I mean, I liked the characters of Jen and of Cassian. I thought they were both had some interesting things, especially I think like Cassian's character. I demonstrated by that they wanted to create a whole show off that, which I'm interested to see what you guys think about Andor. But I do think that character is interesting, of just kind of showing a different side to the rebellion with the kind of spy character. There is kind of that, yeah, everyone dies in the end, which is not very Star Wars, I suppose. But there's also that hopefulness because it really leads into, with the ending, it's going to happen. So I'd say there's like hopefulness, but it also kind of shows more of like the sacrifice that people made. So I appreciate it for that. But I do understand what you're saying about the characters. I just think like I don't know how much they could have done better with that given what they're trying to do.
Yeah, it does end with hope. I mean, some would say a new hope, I suppose. But yeah, and I think that's a fair defense that it's hard to think about, at least unless you've engaged with all the broader material, it's hard to think about Star Wars apart from the Skywalker saga essentially, which this is connected but it's not. And so I don't know, maybe it is because it's just a blip, it's a singular movie with a host of characters that don't go beyond that movie. I mean, unless you've watched Andor, which I have not. But I've heard that Andor makes Rogue One even better by just having that connection and that sort of broadening of the story. Um, yeah, but I don't know, I haven't seen it yet. So that's fair. Um,
I will say I do think Andor is worth watching. I didn't mention it in my opening, and it's sort of like right there on the fringe for me as to whether I put it in my canon, but I might. I do think it's worth watching, and at least I haven't seen beyond the first season, but a friend of mine who we like to debate Star Wars stuff, and he takes a less sort of metaphysical lens on things. For a while, he kept kind of encouraging me, you got to watch it. He really appreciates the kind of just less magical aspects of it, where it's like telling a story of just kind of some regular folks that happen to work in the evil empire. And I think the storytelling is well done. There's no like real heroes for me in the story, but I think the storytelling is good enough, and doesn't get into too much deconstruction. And there's some interesting writing, interesting parts of it, like the high-tech jail panopticon with like social credit score, is a really interesting part of the story. So I haven't seen season two, but I did enjoy Andor enough that I would recommend it for viewing. I don't know if I count it as Star Wars or not, but anyway, that's my opinion on it so far.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why I wasn't super attached to Rogue One. That to me, Star Wars is lightsabers and Jedi and Sith and Force stuff. And so I don't know. It's hard for me to get, I don't know, super involved when that's entirely lacking. Again, I get why people enjoy it, but to me, like that's so much at the heart of what Star Wars is. That's what I want when I watch Star Wars. I will give Andor a go. As I'm doing this broad Star Wars thing series that I'm working on, trying to engage in different media, and so I will give it a go and see what I think about it. See if that redeems some of my um, time spent with Rogue One. But yeah, I don't know. I like the whooshing of lightsabers. Um, Cool. Anything else that anyone wants to talk about that we haven't brought up here? I mean,
Uh, the
no,
Acolyte
go ahead.
just got mentioned, so now I have to say a few things. So I did not immediately watch it, or because I was, of course, very skeptical. I wait to see what people say about things sometimes, and I was like, it can't be that bad. So I watched maybe like 3 episodes. Yeah, it was no. I had to see if it was really as bad because like, I didn't want to just make all my judgments about the show without having seen any of it. I wanted to be able to speak about it with great opinion, but I couldn't do that unless I'd at least seen a little bit of it. So I did watch a few episodes, but I couldn't even keep watching. I mean, it was just, and there's so many plot holes that are now opened because of this show. Just like, oh my goodness, I don't recommend. If you want to laugh, if you want like comedy, just like pop some popcorn and just watch like this, especially the scene, like the power of one. I'm sure you might have seen that scene. It's like all the witches are chanting, and they're like the power of one, the power of two, the power of many. It's really, it's also it's very woke. Yeah, it's yeah.
Yeah, maybe we'll need to watch it in a Mystery Science Theater. That'll be the way to go. Yeah, I've not seen it other than clips and what people have said about it. I can't say I'm excited about the idea of seeing it. I'll probably check it out just so I can talk about it, like at least a few episodes. I'm not going to commit to the whole show, but that definitely, from what I've seen, seems to be one of the worst things to come out of Star Wars ever. And I've seen the holiday special.
I was just babysitting my little 6-year-old niece this evening, and I was talking to her about various things, and Star Wars came up, and she said, "I think that's a boy thing." And I appreciate that Hannah's here because I told her um, mostly it's a boy thing, but there's certainly girls who like Star Wars. So I appreciate you, Hannah, for being here and appreciating stars with the rest of us boys.
Oh, thank you. It is encouraging because I will say I was definitely a little on my own when it came to Star Wars growing up, except for my younger brothers, who I honestly, I think I stuck with it the longest. But I babysit now for these 3 girls at my church. They're like maybe they're like 10, 8, and 6, and they are obsessed with Star Wars. And I come over there and we play lightsabers and we like dress up like Star Wars characters and we'll watch Star Wars and they just want to talk about Star Wars and we'll look through their Star Wars library books. And so I was like, where were you guys when I was a kid? But I was very excited. So it's fun. It's just a family of all girls. But their dad loves Star Wars and he passed that on to them. So I will say, yeah, there's not as many, but it is still uh, there's the next generation coming.
Good. Yeah, I definitely appreciate that as well. My kids are really too young for Star Wars, but they do think my Jabba impression is hilarious. So that's our starting point. Um, is there anything else that we feel like we should discuss? Any other major media or anything? I know we talked about the Mandalorian a little bit. I will say for something that's not lightsaber and force heavy. I mean, it's there, but it's not really the focus. That I definitely did enjoy that. It's very, very much a space western, which is probably what I find appealing about it. And I think that is this wonderful. That's probably my number one pick for the Disney era. Perfect. Um, yeah, next time we'll have to wear our Mandalorian masks. Cool. Yeah, and yeah. So, anything else anyone wants to mention? If not, that's okay. We'll be doing a whole series on Star Wars, and anyone's welcome to pop in wherever interest strikes you. But otherwise, I guess we'll. Yeah, Jordan.
Do we want to give a ranking of the mainline movies? Like I don't know. I think that's something that I see on the Twitter all the time, and I think that'd be a fun way to kind of conclude, just to lay all of our cards on the table.
Yeah. Now, are you going to go beyond three when you do this?
Absolutely,
All
absolutely.
right. So this is a good idea. All right, Jordan, kick us off.
Okay, so it's gonna go Empire, then New Hope, Return of the Jedi, and then based on lightsaber fights alone, um, Revenge of the Sith, then Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace, and then I honestly cannot remember the names of the sequel movies. So it's going to go 7, 8, and 9. I guess I didn't rank Solo or Rogue One, so I'll put Rogue One ahead of 7. Nope, I'm going to put Rogue One ahead of any of the prequels. Sorry, I should have written this down. And then Solo is going to be like somewhere between 8 and 9 for me. I couldn't get behind that one.
Ooh, yeah, it does get kind of confusing trying to list off, was it 11 movies here?
Yeah.
All right. And to be clear, I'm not necessarily even going to go off of like ob whatever this means, objectively best to worst. I'm going to go off favorite to least favorite. And so for that, let's see, I'm going to go with um, Return of the Jedi, Empire Strikes Back, New Hope, Revenge of the Sith, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones. Um, hmm. Solo, Rogue One, Force Awakens, the Rise of Skywalker, and then lastly, Last Jedi, which I just thought was terrible. All right, so there's my list. Hannah, what do you have?
Okay, this is difficult. I was typing it out while you were talking. Okay, let's see. A New Hope, Return of the Jedi, Rogue One, The Empire Strikes Back, Revenge of the Sith, Attack of the Clones, Phantom Menace, The Force Awakens, Solo, whatever the last Disney sequel one was, and The Last Jedi is in last place. However, yeah, this could change on the day-to-day basis.
That's fair. Bold. So you had Rogue One above Empire Strikes Back? Oof.
Yes, okay, if I was just doing this like trying to be objective, I wouldn't. But I really like Rogue One. And like if I was just gonna pick a movie to watch, I guess I would do that. I don't know.
I mean, that's
I
fair.
go
You don't have
back,
to defend your answer.
but I do really like Rogue One.
Cool, cool. All right, Justin, what do you have?
Okay, so I'll go Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, New Hope, and then Mandalorian seasons 1 and 2, Revenge of the Sith, Phantom Menace, Attack of the Clones, and I will never watch any of the other. I might watch Rogue One. I've seen enough people say it's decent, but the other ones, I don't want to insult anyone here, but I honestly just can't even understand why you all even bother watching them after The Force Awakens. I cannot watch any of those other movies. But I may give Rogue One a chance at some point.
Yeah, Rogue One, like I said, even though it's not my favorite movie, it's worth watching. It's a good movie. Um, and when there's certain franchises, I mean, things like Star Wars, things that have strong foundations, I just feel compelled to see it through, no matter how dark and terrible it gets. It's just like Tolkien stuff. Like Rings of Power is terrible, but I'm going to keep watching it so I can talk about how terrible it is. I don't know. It's just it's a problem.
Are you gonna
Um,
watch the new Narnia show?
I have to. I
You
have to.
are?
It's
You
going
are?
to be terrible.
Well, I'm gonna
Um,
trust your review. Like, I'm just gonna watch your review and be entertained by how awful it is, I guess.
I
I don't
mean,
know.
the Lewis and Tolkien space is kind of where I operate. I feel like it's like Frasier said one time that the only thing better than in a perfect meal is a bad meal that you can complain about. He said it better than that, but that's the gist of it. And there's something of value in that, if for no other reason than in engaging with the bad adaptations, the bad spin-off media. It does provide opportunity to just demonstrate how good the original is, and I think that there's some benefit in that. Or even if you could find some traces of value that then you can root back into something substantial. I think there's a, I don't know, evangelistic opportunity there. So that's how I approach Star Wars. Again, I'm not going to see everything that spins out of the Star Wars universe. That's too much. But at least as far as the main stuff, I'm sure I'm going to keep seeing every numbered movie that comes out, no matter how terrible it gets. It's just is what it is. I know I'm funding bad actors here, but whatever. I guess they got me. All right. Ian, give us your list.
So obviously the first one is Star Wars X-Wing Starfighters of Adamar, followed by Star Wars X-Wing Solo Command, followed by Vision of the Future. Okay, so if I'm only talking about the movies, Return of the Jedi is my favorite, and it actually goes almost numerically from there. Empire Strikes Back, A New Hope, but I do put Attack of the Clones next, and then Phantom Menace and Revenge of the Sith at the bottom of the original 6. Disney's really hard for me to rank. A Solo, I definitely enjoy the most. After that, I think it's all just trash. So that's kind of where I end.
Fair enough. It falls down the chute into the trash compactor with the weird monster. Um,
Diagana, Andrew. Diagana.
there you go. Yeah, I would never be able to come up with that. Appreciate the insight. So, all right. So yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap just our general conversation about Star Wars. We're gonna be moving forward with. I like the garbage octopus. Yes, I like Jordan's nomenclature there. So yeah, and so we'll be doing series talking about all the main movies, some other spin-off stuff as interest allows, and so anyone here is invited back as well as we have a much broader community that's interested in Star Wars. I know a number of people wanted to be here but just couldn't, and so feel free to jump in wherever again interest and schedule allows as we go forward with throughout this grand galaxy, even if it's we're moving further and further toward the outer rim as we go. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap it there, and I will cut off the. Oh, actually, before we cut off the video here, does anyone have anything to plug? I know Ian, you have something to plug here, Star Wars related. I want to give you that chance.
Yes, I do a Star Wars podcast about the X-Wing books, which I just promoted. It's called Reader 2 Standing By, and my friend and I go through all of the X-Wing books and try and give both historical and thematic analysis.
Good, fantastic. So yeah, everybody go listen to his podcast, go subscribe. I'll put a link here in the recording and on the podcast. All right. And I guess on that, unless anyone else wants to chime in, we'll go ahead and cut the live stream now.
May the force be with you all.
When you go to the roots of the word philosophy, you find the love of wisdom, which unfortunately is not what you find at the roots of all who call themselves philosophers. Now, how do we get here? What are the ideas that shape our world, and what can the old world tell us in response to the perennial questions of what it means to be human, what is our purpose, and what, if anything, ought we aspire to? In a brief history of ideas, we will navigate major epics of thought and survey some of the most important figures in the Western canon, including Plato, Aristotle, Boethius, Augustine, Anselm, Aquinas, Descartes, Nietzsche, Sartre, and Kierkegaard. And of course, we will consider even more names, but these are the thinkers that will supply our primary readings. Each week will include primary sources that will be provided as PDFs, although these are all texts that do belong in your personal library. You will be recommended some secondary texts, you'll be provided with some recorded presentations for you to watch at your leisure, ongoing Discord chats, and weekly live meetings to discuss the readings. I've been teaching philosophy for many years, and I can say with confidence that you will leave this 6-week course with a better understanding of the foundations of Western thought than most contemporary philosophy majors. Enroll today by going to patreon.com/mythicmind and checking out the shop, or you can gain access to all courses, past, present, and any course that begins during the term of your subscription by purchasing a Tier 3 annual subscription. So again, purchase a Tier 3 annual subscription, and I'll give you a special code that gives you access to all courses that either have taken place or do start in this term. And I sincerely hope to see you there.